RIG event, actually, with the Leadership Preparation Development Research Interest Group, together with the Structural Reform Research Interest Group, where we have Kathy, Simon, and Mark Gibson as the co-conveners. And my name is Susanne Salin. I'm one of 3 co-conveners here for this LPD RIG, together with Deb Althwaite and Bernie Moreno. So we are represented in, just 3 of us are representing 3 countries. I'm in Sweden, and Deb is in England, and Bernie is in Australia. Really good, and we are so excited for this event today. And it's wonderful to see so many of you here today. You are all very welcome. And Deb has already mentioned that you could put in your name and location or email address in the chat just to be able to network. And I will just make a short introduction, and then I will pass the word first to Tony and then to Anna. So the RIG conveners for these 2 research interest groups have invited Anna Christina D'Addio from Unesco to give a presentation today. And we have also invited Professor Tony Bush to be kind of the discussant after Anna's presentation. And critical friend, perhaps, is a good word. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. And we, of course, want to say a special welcome to both Anna and to Tony. Before I pass the word forward, I think we just shall remind us about a few practical matters. As you heard, Cynthia has already started the recording of this session. So we will start it from now, and when we come to the Q&As of the session, we will stop the recording. And Anna will be presenting for about 30 to 45 minutes. And then we will give the word back to Tony, and he will be a critical friend and discussant for about 30 minutes. And the rest of the time, we will just have a joint discussion and the Q&A together with us that are joining this session. So I would just like to start to invite Professor Tony Bush to present Anna a bit closer, because they have been working together. Stop sharing. Oops. So.
Thank you, Suzanne, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to see so many people joining this important session today, and I want particularly to add my thanks to Anna for making this presentation. It was a great privilege for me to be working with Anna last year in the development of the Global Education Monitoring Report, both working with the various drafts that Anna produced and also attending a session in Paris with other invited experts, in inverted commas, participating in the development of this important report. And I think for our field, those of us involved in educational leadership, it's really important to think that the Global Education Monitoring Report focused on leadership last year. I think it's another statement about the developing importance and growth of our field. And so I was more than delighted to accept the invitation to take part. And I want to say how impressed I was at the time, and continue to be impressed by the work that Anna has done in developing this report, along with her colleague Daniel, who I see is also joining us today. So not much more for me to say, really, just to warmly welcome you all, and in particular warmly welcome Anna, and I'm really looking forward to your report today. So thank you very much.
And I think we just go right over to you, Anna.
Yeah.
Now it's your time, and you can start to share your presentation, and we are so excited to hear your presentation. I would just give you a reminder, 5 minutes, when it's 5 minutes left.
Yes, perfect. I'm really delighted to be here with you, and thank you, Tony, for the really kind words. It has been a great experience to have you as an expert during the preparation of the Global Education Monitoring Report 2024 5, and to work also with Daniel that is here today. It has been also a very big achievement to publish this report that, as you know, is a collective undertaking because there are other colleagues that have worked on the drafting of some other chapters. And just to present myself, I am Anna D'Addio. I am the thematic lead, the chief education policy / theme of the Global Education Monitoring Report. And it was a real privilege to work in this report with Tony and to learn a lot in the making of this report. So I've been asked to focus a little bit more on leadership preparation and development, but I have also decided to give you a more thorough presentation of what is in the report, just to give you an idea and give you the envy of looking at it inside. And so just to introduce it, it's, I think Tony has said that, and in discussion with Suzanne also, it's really important to focus on educational leadership. Is not yet enough looked as one of the most important factor, but the Global Education Monitoring Report has always considered that it is one of the most important critical driver of student success, school environment, and national education policies. So during the presentation, I will try to share some of the insights from the Global Education Monitoring Report of this year to understand gaps, to highlight the challenges in educational leadership, not just educational leadership preparation and development, but educational leadership to core, and also strategies for improvement. I have used for this presentation two main sources. One is, of course, the Global Education Monitoring Report 2024-5 on leadership in education, titled Lead for Learning. And the second one is the peer country profiles on school leadership, which is a project that I lead, but Daniel April, that is here with me, coordinates. So with these peer profiles, we collect information through desk research in the GEM report, information on policies and legislation, regulation that are around the theme of the report. So this year we have decided to focus on school leadership. And we have decided to focus on school leadership, and we have prepared 211 country profiles on school leadership, covering all member states of Unesco and some observers states. And why I'm talking about this here, because some of the figures that I will present, some of the insights and the results come out of the mapping we have done with this collected information. And the information that we have collected has focused on four main aspects: on terminology, so how are addressed the school leaders and in particular principals in countries' regulations, because these, I think it's important to understand how they see the role of school leaders. The second part of the profiles has focused on school principals, leadership standards and roles, on selection and working condition, and on the training, leadership preparation and development. Then there is another part that is really about shared leadership that has focused on teachers, parents, and students. And in this case, we have looked at regulations, policies concerning school management committees and boards, middle leaders, parents and students, how they work and they are represented within schools, and the final aspects concern governance. So, and in particular, the aspects of autonomy, assessment and accountability, and teacher assessment by school leaders. So you will see some of these indicators during the presentations because they allow also to understand how countries confront the issue of educational leadership. But before starting going into the issue of educational leadership, I would like to start showing something that show why we need strong educational leaders. So the first chart on your left, what shows it? It shows that learning levels are falling. And this is a trend that has been going on for some time. It was thought that COVID was one of the main responsible for learning level falling. However, we can see that scoring mathematics have been declining for some time now. The second important message and figure is about auto school. Auto school, if you look at this chart in the middle, you realize that auto school rate have been stagnating over the last year, declining by really 1% only. And the last chart is on prioritization of education financing. And what's important, it's important to highlight is that we are also falling far behind when it comes to financing. And despite the major challenges that I just illustrate and the fact that there are more young people and children in university and in schools, there is also a problem related to the fact that countries are not prioritizing enough education spending. And in fact, priority to education spending is falling. So that's it's an important message. Even more, we need strong education leaders. The second point, so when we talk about the leaders in education, what we are talking about? What is important to say that the report has taken a very broad stance on education leadership. So the point is that we are looking in the report not just at principles or what happens within schools, but we are looking also what happens at the system levels and at political level. And in fact, you will see that in the report, even if today I will focus a little bit more on principles, we talk about principle, we talk about vice principals, teacher leaders, parents, students, and communities, and what are their roles in terms of education leadership, how they are prepared, what is their impact, if any, and what are the challenges. And a very important point of the report is that it focuses also on system leaders, what in general is called the middle tier. So all those people that work within ministries of educations, for example, as in different roles, but that are the main contact point between the schools and the policymakers. And for example, these are local officials, but also central officials such as inspectors. And then the last part of the report looks into political leadership, those that have the power to steer education policy. And so these include a very range broad of actors that are ministries of education, but also parliamentarians, a lot of union leaders, the student leaders and activists, and the business leaders that can really influence and steer education policies, and then how education system work. So the report, in fact, has considered that education leadership is a process of social influence, which maximize the efforts of many other actors working together towards the achievement of a goal. And this goal is, of course, our education outcomes. But as we know that education is a transformative mean that allows to transform also societal outcomes, this is really a very broad goal. There are also many studies, many reviews that show that there are multiple leadership style that can lead to multiple education to have multiple education outcomes, so to focus on multiple education outcomes. However, what the report highlight, and I would like this to say this from the beginning because this is a very important issue. We don't consider that there are just exceptional individuals, but educational leadership is really something that is made and realized by many actors working together. And so it's really in this sense that can be seen as a process of social influence. And so it becomes really important to encourage and nurture diverse group of people with good leadership potential to pursue such careers. And the very important point that the report makes is that, and we have started really looking at this issue, that there is not enough emphasis on the professionalization of school leaders. And then, so how to enhance the professionalization of school leaders and also of other leaders working in the system and working in the political spheres. And as I was saying in the beginning, what we see in the way countries consider as school leaders in particular here is that they call them with different title, they identify them in different ways. In some countries, while principle is really widely used, and you will see in the report we have used principle to refer to the school leaders, the highest school leader level. There are many other countries that use head teacher, head master, school director, school manager. And if you look at these terms and you look then at the regulations or the policies, you realize that these different terms underlie different competencies, different skills, or different way of consider the school leaders. So when they say head teacher, they really think that the principal is not someone that comes to the principalship position external from another workplace. It's generally someone that has achieved the maximum level of the teacher career scale. And so, or when it is a school manager, a school director, they consider more a manager. So for example, in Italy, the school principal is not called anymore preside. That was really a principal. It is now called dirigente scolastico, that is really a school manager, and with the competencies that are really aligned with those that work as manager in the public sector. So you see, it's really also important to look at how they are defined and considered in in the regulation, in the policies, in the legislation. So the report make clear and focus that there are four building on different framework, the Latewood framework in particular, 2004, it considered that there are four essential dimensions that need to be nurtured an education leader. And when I say education leader, is not just for school leaders, is for all leaders. The first one is set expectation. So this means define a vision and have a clear vision, communicate clear the vision to rely people working with the school leader or the system leader behind this common expectation. A focus on learning, which is really important. So last year we published a report on technology. This is an example. The focus should not be on the tool, but should be on the final achievement, on the final outcome that one wants to achieve. The third area that is very important is foster collaboration. Collaboration, not just within the school or within the system, but also with other stakeholders, with other partners, with the communities, with the parents and the students. And the final one is develop and empower people. So this means also investing and taking in the development, in the professional development of the people working with the school leader, for example, within the school, and also take it seriously the appraisal, giving feedback to teachers, receive also feedback and use this feedback to understand where are the needs and how they need to be addressed. These are the areas that we have considered the essential dimension of educational leadership we have been focused on. And you can see that these areas correspond to different types of leadership. For example, focus on learning can be identified with instructional leadership, and the others also with the other kind of leadership that are mentioned and studied in the literature. Why they need to we need to focus on this area, and why these essential dimension need to be nurtured, because these are essential for student learning and beyond. So there have been studies that have shown, for example, that over 1/4 of variation in student learning levels can be attributed to school leaders. And not just that, in many cases, in many studies, it has been shown that good leadership is correlated with improved teaching practices, but also improved communication, improved collaboration, and improved awareness of the needs of students. So these are essential dimensions, and I will come back on this over the presentation. So in these terms, the report has focused on some main areas, recommendations that are directed to education leaders. And to realize this is important that in terms, for example, of trust and empower, what we mean that? We mean creating the enabling condition for school principals to improve education. It means that leaders need the opportunity to take decision, and we need, in this case, to trust them. And there are studies that shows that leaders' influence is greater when they are trusted to use their skills. However, when we look at autonomy, for example, we look at autonomy is not always recognized, and at the same time, autonomy is very difficult because it's not sufficient without support measure, is not sufficient without accountability. So when I talk about support measure, it means also have school principal in this case that are well prepared and that their roles are clearly identified. Um, they are they have adequate, timely, and predictable and equitable resources, which is not always the case. And they have also accountability for resource use and that are related to feasible outcomes. When autonomy is given without these measures, it can have really different outcomes, and especially there it can lead to different outcomes in different contexts, which go against equity. Yet, we know very well that there are studies that have shown that in particular context, in particular in high-income countries, the more autonomy principals have, the higher a country's mathematical performance. So, and note that I have used here the words in particular context. I think that the context word, the word context is very important when we talk about education leadership, not just when we talk about autonomy, when we talk about everything concerning education leadership. The second recommendation of the report, which is very important for the discussion of today, is about investing in the professionalization of school principal. So this means select, develop, and recognize. So the first point is select through open, competitive, and inclusive recruitment. When we have prepared the peer counter profile, we have seen that there are still many countries that do not use open, competitive, and inclusive recruitment modalities. Only 63% of countries apply this modality in both primary and secondary education. In many cases, and I will show some chart about that, is that it's just necessary to have teacher experience or to be a fully qualified teacher. We think that it's fundamental for school principal to be to have had a career as a teachers, because only in that way they know what happens in the classroom. However, we know also that the best teachers do not necessarily make the best principals. And that's exactly the point of coming into the leadership preparation and development. For example, we have seen that 36 of countries specify management experience as a prerequisite. And as I was saying, on the contrary, teaching experience is often prioritized in principal selection and recruitment process. About half of country rely on teaching experience only. It means that they don't ask any other kind of experience when selecting school principal. Over a third only consider both managerial and teaching experience. 2% do not consider teaching experience, only consider administrative experience. And what is really coming out as a very important criteria is to be a fully qualified teachers. So as I was saying, it's very important to have teachers that are principals, but again, they are not necessarily, a teacher is not necessarily prepared to be a principal. There are differences across country. For example, here you have the example of Timor-Leste, where teachers must serve as a deputy head teacher for 4 years and hold specific degrees. and to qualify to become a deputy head teacher, they need at least 7 years of service. So you see in this case, the combination between different criteria. And for example, in Angola, in primary school, they need to be a permanent staff in the school with a degree in education science and 5 years of teaching experience. And what's the peer profile suggests is also that selection, recruitment, and working condition are also shaped by the type of education governance. As I was saying before, 63% of countries use open competition for principal selection in both primary and secondary schools. In 42% of countries, the selection is centralized, so is made at the level of the central ministries of education, while in 23% they handle it locally, also at the level of the schools. But in most cases, the appointment is validated by the ministries of education. So this means that it's not left to the local decision. What is very interesting also is the difference of statutes concerning the school principal. For example, in 75% of countries, the principal in public schools are civil servants, but only in 37% of countries they have permanent contracts. I think that's a very important point, because you can see it as a negative or positive element, because you can say that when they have a permanent contract and there is not preparation or leadership, their skills will be, when they will be outdated. However, we have also seen that in cases where the school principal have temporary contracts, there is an additional element of stress, anxiety related to the uncertainty of their role. And so there's also means that in many countries, the principals are members of trade unions with standardized salary in many cases, but only 1/3 offer financial incentives. And that's also a very important point, because the lack of preparation or training coupled with the lack of the right financial incentives, or the fact that appraisals in many countries, or principal evaluation, even if they exist, they are mostly used for sanction. So there are only 39% of countries that use appraisals of principal to promote them or to enhance their position. So this means that very often they declare that their working conditions are not good, and their job is very difficult, and so there may be difficulties to move to the role of school principals. And that's also important to say. This is something that I will look into the gender report that will be launched in the next months. That women are underrepresented in all senior leadership positions in education, and that's a very important issue, because we see that also in terms of leadership training and professional development, when they are represented, they don't have access to this training. And strengthening women leadership is essential for improving educational outcomes and achieving gender equality. In the report already, you will find these results that is concerning primary education. There is exactly the same for secondary education. What we show is that there are many more female teachers than principals, and that the leadership gaps widen with the level of education. In countries where you have a higher share of female teachers, there is a tendency to have a higher share of female principals. However, if we look on average on countries with comparable data, we see that in the countries covered, in the 48 countries covered by Thalys, we have 68% of teachers in lower secondary, but only 37% of education leadership role in schools. And when we look at higher education, they make up less than 25% of this position. And in addition, when we look at what countries are doing to promote gender diversity in selecting school leaders with specific measure, only 11% of countries do that. So it's important to talk about this because there is an issue also of diversity that should be mentioned when we talk about educational leadership. It's important to look at who are the talented candidates that are acceding to the leadership, the educational leadership positions. And until now, the diversity is really lagging behind. So it's important to say that over time, there has been a shift in the focus towards instructional leadership from traditional management that saw the school leader has someone that had to do finance, scheduling, about the classroom or administration roles. Nowadays, expanding responsibility are expanding, and school leaders need to tackle an increasing number of tasks that are more and more complex, like observing classroom, guiding teacher collaboration, focusing on student learning, on equity and diversity. And so there are also specific needs that emerge, and these needs are not uniform. They vary according to context. They vary according to principal experience and the background, for example. And here, looking at data from the Thalys and the peer, we have seen that the focus is still very much on continuous professional development and very, very little focus in policies, legislation, regulation on pre-service and in-service program. When we know that, especially the pre-service and induction programs are really, really important for the novice principals that can experience various difficulties and face different challenges. And what's really interesting to say, and I will show some charts about it, is that when we look at the four core dimension of training that I showed, four dimension of leadership I talked at the beginning, there are only 10% of pre-service and 21% of in-service program that focus on all four core dimensions in their training programs. We have looked at this through 142 training programs in 92 countries that reported this information. And so we see that if we consider the four core dimensions of educational leadership, there is not enough focus on this in the training. Moreover, almost half of principals in richer countries do not receive training before appointment, and only 31% of countries have induction program for new principals. I will go through these points in the following slides. So the first thing that the report show is that it's really an exception that principals begin their tenure having done a course in school administration. You can see here the situation of different countries that are covered in Thalys, where you see that in some countries, the distribution of the principal that have done in school a course in school administration varies a lot. For example, in Finland, everyone has done this course, and in Croatia, more than half have not. So you have a different situation between these two extreme, but still, you can see also that in many cases, this kind of course is taken after taking up the position as principal. This is an important chart because it shows that there are some dimensions of leadership skills that are not yet considered enough. And this is critical because leadership skills go beyond the teaching expertise. Based on the country profiles, we have examined which countries mandate training for school principals in their regulations. And what we see here is that, again, there are very important differences across region, especially in terms of the pre-service and induction. And the many countries, most of countries, 88% of countries mandate continuous professional development for principal, but only 60% do that for pre-service training, and only 31% for induction training, which is critical for novice principal. And what I was saying in the previous slides is that very few countries focus on this leadership, the core dimension of leadership in their training programs. Doing the analysis for, as I was saying, 142 principal training program for 92 countries, we have seen that the most common areas covered are instructional leadership, transformational leadership, staff development, and shared leadership. So this is really something that, and as I was saying before, the different core dimensions, these 4 core dimensions, may be seen as corresponding to the different types of leadership. Focus on leadership, as I was noting, instructional leadership, setting a vision, and relying people again behind this vision is more transformational leadership. Then we have the shared leadership is focus on foster collaboration, and only 18% of these 142 principal training programs cover all 4 dimensions. And moreover, if you look at the chart, the bottom chart, you see these different areas, how they are covered in, or if they are covered in pre-service and in service. And so, as I was saying in the previous slides, was that all areas are covered only in 10% of pre-service training program and 21% of in-service program. The most common areas covered is the focus on learning in the in-service training program. So you see, that's a very important chart because if we look at and important message, I think, because if we say that there are these 4 core essential dimension of leadership, and there is just this very low percentage of countries that cover them in their training programs, it's very difficult for principals that enter or are in their position to exert what they are called to do. And it's also important to note that in answering to what are the needs for professional development, we see that there are at least a quarter of principals that report a need for professional development. And based on the data of Thalys, we have seen that in this area, there are these are where the principal report a high level of need for professional development. And you see that they span from teacher collaboration and data use to equity and diversity. This is the global based on the data of Thalys. However, it's very interesting to note that while on average there are principal needs in specific areas that you see here, for example, 15% on equity and diversity, 28% on data use, and 28% on teacher collaboration. We see also that there are important differences according to context. For example, needs are very high in rural school, even in Europe. For example, Croatia and Belgium, and the disadvantaged communities, and in many countries in Eastern and Southeastern Asia, especially concerning, for example, equity and diversity, teacher collaboration, or data use. Now, with when there is even when there is training, what is important to recognize and to validate the knowledge of principle is that the certification. And what we have seen using data from teams is that there are huge differences in the extent to which countries focus on principal certification. This chart show the share of grade 4 students whose principal had an educational leadership qualification or credential, either a certificate or license or a postgraduate degrees. And you can see here that 68% of grade 4 attending school where principal had a school leader certificate or license. In the report, you will find also the chart for grade 8 students where the average is 71%. So this means that at lower level of education, the share, about 2/3 of students, only 2/3 of students attended a school where the principal had a school leader certificate or license. And this is also a quite low statistics, even if there are very different situations across countries. Yet the report shows that despite this difference, despite the lack and the gaps, there are very many effective approaches. And some that are very important are, for example, mentoring and coaching. Even if the two modalities are different and with different cost, there have been studies that have shown that, for example, in Latin America, pairing novices with experienced leaders reduces stress and improves performance. It enhances leadership effectiveness, develops self-awareness, and drive personal and professional growth. And also what has been really shown to help a lot is practice-oriented learning, like internship, problem-based learning, and field experience. The countries, the example of the countries reported in the report are many. For example, here, just as a list, I would say, because in many cases, all these programs have been studied by big group that I look at leadership training for ISTL, ISSPP. But some countries example for Singapore, for example, the mentoring scheme is embedded in the leader in education programs. And it's mandatory. In France, to become chef d'établissement, school principal, you need to have 1 year alternation of of theory and practical internship with a minimum 154 hours of training. In Ireland, you have a 3-year induction phase tailored to each principal readiness and school context. You can see here one thing that these countries are high-income countries. Mentoring and coaching are really less developed and common in low-income contexts where they would be more necessary. There is also a dearth of literature about the impact of well-designed leadership programs. However, there are some many of the few studies that show that strong programs are linked to improve student achievement, lower turnover, and better teacher collaboration. For example, some evidence about the United States, the principal pipeline, that is really something that is a very structured pipeline into the principalship. And this initiative has increased the reading scores by 6 percentile points and math by 3 percentile points in targeted schools. This is the study of Gates 2019. In Argentina, diagnostic-based feedback for principal improved math and reading by around 0.3 standard deviation. In Guatemala, training reduced student dropout by 4% at just the cost of $3 per student. And in South Africa, the advanced certificate in education has managed to help to double improvement rates in school leaving exam. So you see that there are very important effects that are associated with well-designed leadership programs. However, what the literature and what the analysis that we have done in the report show that there are programs, training programs that are different, and there is unequal quality. Some programs remain overly academic with little experiential learning. There is the issue of cascade models, especially in African countries, where school leaders, school principal rely on the training of leaders. And so they rely on existing leaders and can dilute content if not monitored. And there is an issue of long-term monitoring. As I was saying, there are still few studies about the impact of training. And so we need really more robust research globally. There are also challenges. Yes?
That's good. About 5 minutes to go.
Okay. There are also challenges to participations. As you can see on this chart, that they show the distribution of time in different tasks. And in some cases, you have school principal that spend teaching related tasks that is twice as much than in other countries. When I talk about teaching related, it's teaching, but also curriculum tasks. And so there is an issue of workload and stress. The fact that principals often work long hours, in some countries 60 plus hours weekly, and on average only, despite these differences across countries, they spend only about 17.5% of instructional tasks. They are really bagged in different tasks. There are also barriers to training in terms of lack of incentives, cost, scheduling conflicts, and policy gaps can reduce the uptake. And also the fact that in terms of who participates and the effect of the impact of the training, in many cases, we see high turnover that disrupts school continuity, and and with other effects, lower teacher morale and lower student performance. So I think that I will be concluding here because I have no time to go through the other parts. But so the point is that based on the data of Thalys in this respect, we see that when preparation and professional development programs exist, aspiring or incumbent principals may be unable to benefit from them, either because they reported a conflict between professional development and work. On average, 36% of lower secondary school principals reported such conflict, with a much higher share in Belgium, France, and the largest share in Japan, or the lowest share of such a conflict in Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. 36% cited a lack of incentive, with 72% the double in Spain and more the double in Saudi Arabia. And the cost of training remains really an important barrier. 32% that were interviewed in Thalys reported it being a concern, but with differences varying from 9% in Israel and 11% in Austria to 60% in Chile and 68% in Colombia. So I will stop here, just saying that I know we have had discussion a lot with Tony about the standards, and we have seen that countries are moving to standards, but the standard could really help to improve the professionalization of school principal, but they need to reflect this country cultural context and be formative. I stop here, and I thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for a super inspirational and super interesting presentation. I think I could have listened to kind of a few more hours. So Tony, I will pass the word over to you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne, and Anna, thank you for a brilliant presentation. It must have been so difficult for you to get the depth and breadth and length of your report into a presentation of under an hour. So congratulations on that. And you've raised so many important issues for those of us in Belmas who care deeply about these issues. I really want to start by asking a kind of core question, which in a way you've addressed, which is the key issue about how do principals and other leaders acquire the knowledge, the understanding and skills to be effective leaders. Is the core overriding question for me in my own thinking and research about these issues. And a whole range of issues you've spoken about, I'm going to respond to now, if I may. And forgive me, colleagues, if I'm not all that coherent, because I'm doing this in direct response to what Anna has presented here today. So let's start with the key point that Anna made early on, which is the issue of the importance of leadership. And of course, this is no surprise to any of us on this call. We're aware of it and we're committed to it in our approach to these matters. But I would argue that the response, the systemic response to these key findings about 25% of variation in student outcomes being to do with leadership has been inadequate to pick up on that. And still you see, even it has to be said in the Sustainable Development Goals, focuses on classroom teaching and resources, with leadership being neglected. So it was a great privilege for me to be involved in this with Anna to a small extent, but also that the Global Education Monitoring Report chose to focus on leadership, because what this does is to highlight the importance in a really important report. And I think it's incumbent on all of us, I think, to be talking to our governments about, so how are you going to respond to this Global Education Monitoring Report? So I've made a little note to do that myself here in England. So I like the kind of banner, Anna, about select, develop, recognize that you used at various points in the presentation. And so one of the key issues for me it's always been both a puzzle and an annoyance all at the same time. Why do we think it's all right to have unqualified and unprepared principals leading our schools? Given the evidence of how important it is in terms of student outcomes, given the huge responsibility that we have in looking after children and young people, why is it that governments think it's okay not to prepare them? The data around only a teaching qualification being required, and not even that in some countries, and I think is really very important, and it's probably worth spending a minute or two on that. My own view on this is very clear that a teaching qualification and teaching experience are necessary but not sufficient requirements to be an effective leader. And Anna, your very important point about knowing what goes on in classrooms is greatly strengthened if people have that good teaching experience, first of all. So I think that's good. In England, it's probably about 10 years ago now, they began to think about ideas of people coming into school headship, having never worked in schools before. And such people were allowed to take the National Professional Qualification for Headship. I was among many people who criticised that at the time, and it has been quietly dropped from that provision. So I think that's a really important starting point. The other interesting point that you made, Anna, that I think we've not given as much attention to as we should, or maybe I should just say me, is what's the significance of the situation where teachers are civil servants in the way that you described, something like 75%, I think you said. What does that mean is it's harder for them to maintain autonomy, which you also said, because their livelihoods, their futures, their careers depend on accepting that hierarchical relationship with government and with senior officials that implies. I'm not aware of much research on that. And so a collective challenge to you all today. Maybe that's something we should think about looking at as well. You made the important point also about the underrepresentation of women in senior leadership roles. I mean, this is widely understood, widely regretted, and the gap is narrowing. But of course, women still remain very underrepresented. One of the significant parts you touched on, Anna, and it's come through in research of our Belmas colleagues like Marianne Coleman, Kay Fuller, the late Jackie Lumbie, and so on, about how you get a higher overall effectiveness rate in terms of student outcomes where women are very well represented, rather than in a situation where men remain dominant in that situation. The other thing I found interesting about in what you've had to say, and what I know to some extent from my own research, is this shift in emphasis of principals being instructional leaders. I mean, I think that is quite striking. Your report brings that out very strongly. And if I look back to the founding of the National College for School Leadership in England, which is incidentally a quarter of a century ago today, which is this year, quite a striking point, that in research that the NCSL commissioned right at the very beginning, where it tried to look at what did successful systems do in terms of leadership preparation, what we found then was every successful system included instructional leadership in their programs. And so I'm glad that that's continued to develop and is important. What's challenging about it, and we don't have time to follow up on this now, what's challenging about that? So what is the nature of this instructional leadership part of the training? What is it? Is it awareness raising? Does it provide opportunities to practice the skills required? So how does all that come together, and how does it work if we train a principal to do that, when the reality is that, especially in larger schools, it's quite impossible for instructional leadership to be only the role of a single person? For two reasons. Firstly, they simply wouldn't have enough time to do it. And secondly, they might lack the specific subject skills required to provide effective classroom observation, for example, in subjects in which they themselves have not been trained. So I think it's a helpful trend. It's not surprising in a way, but the questions remain about about how that happens. One of the other many interesting points you made, Anna, was about the nature of induction and the extent to which that happened. And so having, I think, less than a third of countries where there is principal induction is very interesting. It raises two thoughts for me. So to what extent is induction a replacement for the training and preparation that wasn't provided? To what extent is it an extension of the training and preparation that was provided? And I'm struck by 31% doesn't sound too bad, but in many contexts, that's nothing more than administrative in nature. So here are the procedures and the reporting processes that you need to follow as a head teacher, and not so much about here's how you can be effective within your school in improving student welfare and outcomes. So there's issues around what is the nature of that kind of process as well. That's very important. I was struck by the figure about 88% of countries mandating CPD for principals. In a way, that figure seems out of line with some of the other statistics and data you've provided in your presentation, Anna. And it raises questions for me about, so what is this CPD they're mandating? So I know that some countries, including ones where I've worked, have a points-based system based on the number of hours you spend doing CPD, with not much attention to what the CPD actually is. So, for example, I'm going to be presenting in Turkey in April at a conference there, and if they attend the conference, they get these CPD points. Of course, they probably deserve some points to have to listen to me in a conference in Turkey, but it's an interesting question about, so what's the follow-up of that?
Yes.
How effective is that? And how do we deal with the challenge we all face in this field of the transition from knowledge to highly effective practice in schools and classrooms? I think that transition is an issue actually that Suzanne and Maria, who I can see on the call, and Derek Glover and I are currently thinking about and writing about as well. So let me go on to some of the other important issues you've raised. The issue of there being more in-service training rather than pre-service training is an interesting one, isn't it? And you could look at in-service and say, so what's that then? That's learning on the job. You put it very directly. It's learning on the job, and I put it too strongly now for effect. So who are the casualties of a learning on the job process? My sense in many places is that the assumption of stakeholders, including teachers and others, will be that a principal arrives in the school fully formed, fully ready to do an effective job. But if their training is actually in service, then of course that won't be the case. So that's just a little thought. Why would countries do it? It's more effectively in terms of financial resource. Because if you do preparation ahead of appointment and those leaders never become principals, then in a very narrow sense, that's quite an opportunity lost. It's resource wasted in inverted commas. And that was certainly some of the thinking in the early to medium days of the National College, where they tightened it up to stop it being just a form of CPD because of that notion of waste, if that's the right word. The other point I wanted to make was an interesting one about certification. And I thank you for that. And it's part of your select, develop, recognize banner that appeared in several places. So certification is an important mode of recognition for me, not just recognition for the individual I'm qualified to do this job, but also recognition for stakeholders. Now, this is a person who's been trained to do this job. And that ought to give people more confidence where that's the case. And some people may have heard me say this before, but I've always been concerned about, would we be okay if we had doctors learning on the job? Just as you're been anaesthetized and you're going into your operational procedure? The answer might be no. And for someone like me who travels a lot but actually hates flying, someone would say, no, this pilot's training today, but don't worry, he knows most of what he needs to do. So I think we need to take educational leadership as seriously we do other professions, I suppose, what I'm saying here. Again, you mentioned the issue of mentoring and coaching, and it's very important in some systems. And you've touched on Singapore, and mentoring is a core part of the principal preparation programs in Singapore, as I know from being an external examiner there. Why doesn't it happen more? It's very expensive. If it's carried out as expected in the literature of being a one-to-one relationship between a highly experienced and successful principal and a novice, those one-to-one relationships are very expensive, either in terms of payment, if the individuals are paid, or in terms of the time given by the experienced principal, if this is done as a professional obligation rather than for payment. So I do think there are challenges there that we need to think about. The other issue that you touched on, there are lots of interesting issues, Anna, but the issue of the relationship between long hours of work and stress and burnout, and which I don't think you said, but I may have missed it, its implications for principal recruitment and retention. So imagine a marketing strategy where we said, here's a job that you will enjoy doing. It'll take 60 hours a week. You'll be under pressure from every stakeholder, above, below, and laterally, and you will be stressed most of the time. It's not a big sell, is it? Just, even though you can say, well, there are lots of other things and lots of people who enjoy it, and lots of head teachers who exhibit resilience, and still what I think an NCSL report said some years ago, are still enchanted, still rather than disenchanted leaders. I think it is a challenge about that. And what can we do? I mean, what could be done about that? We've seen an expansion in other senior leadership roles in many countries, but it doesn't seem to have dealt with the issue. Just the final point I wanted to make, and thank you, Suzanne, for the opportunity, which is something you didn't have a chance to develop properly, Anna, in your presentation because of time. That is the issue of standards. And you and I, Anna, and Daniel also had some interesting conversations about this, which you'll no doubt recall. And you're right to say they're becoming more common. And I think policymakers find the move to standards an easier way of stressing what needs to be done rather than looking more holistically at the role of principals. I've always been quite concerned about it. Some of you will know Professor Ronglata very well, as I do. He was always concerned about standards atomizing the role of principals, and you know that I think that, Anna, because I mentioned it to you a few times. So there's a challenge. But so should we have standards? And they are there in many places. They provide a relatively straightforward means of assessing whether principals have developed the skills and competence required. The worry is that in some situations it leads to a tick box approach. So I remain unconvinced, but I think I'm probably swimming against the tide on that one, because I do think that's a direction of travel. So I hope that's all made some kind of sense to colleagues in responding to Anna's report. But I really just want to conclude by thanking you, Anna, and Daniel also, for coming today and making this presentation. I'm delighted to see that leadership is on the global agenda through your work. I think it's important for everything that we do as a collective group. And let me pause there with my thanks to you, Anna, and back to you, Suzanne.
Thank you
so much. Anna,
Yes.
would you like to respond to
I mean,
shortly?
Very, very shortly. Thanks a lot, Tony. That's really wonderful. I mean, you touch upon very, very important issues that I also highlighted in the presentation, and with very important question that in some case I think need the more robust research. Some of those and or kind of answer, for example, the questions why we let unprepared school principals in our schools. I have some ideas, but I think we need more hours to discuss all this. And also on your point on the need to follow up. I mean, how these programs, these continued professional development programs, are followed up. And I think one idea here was also that aligns with your idea is the fact that if you look at appraisal, they don't mention very often, they don't refer very often to these training programs preparation, but they are mainly used to sanction. So there is no very little incentives also in doing the appraisal of the principles. And finally, I would like to just come back to the issue of standards, because, as you said, I didn't have time to go into it, and as you said, we have discussed this in many times. What was interesting in the report, because you know that we have looked at that in the country profiles, we have looked at the fact that, in fact, many countries have this kind of standards that are embedded in laws and policies, so very generic way of saying what principals are expected to do, in fact, what they are expected to comply, and the leadership skills that they are expected to have. But there are less than half of the countries, 49% for the precision, that have national standards in standalone documents. And in many of these countries, you have also a focus on some of the dimension, the core dimension of leadership. Yet, if we look at specifically at one dimension that I think is very important, is the promoting collaboration one. Only 51% of the countries embed this dimension in their standards. And very often there is not also the task of they are not expected even to appraise, to make the appraisal of teachers. So when we talk about classroom observation, or when we talk about instructional leadership training, I think your question was really relevant, what they are doing really during this instructional leadership training. I think that's a very important point to develop, because in many cases, they are not even given feedback to the teachers. And so there are different areas that need to be also developed and looked at, research more. And I think that all you said was perfectly aligned with our conclusion. So once again, thanks a lot for your wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the both of you. So I'm really curious to see if there are any questions from all of us who are participating here. If you could raise your hand if you would like to.
And I think we're just going to turn our recording off, yes. Suzanne, as well. Yes. Thank you. Thanks, Cynthia.